Do you know what Jesus really meant when he spoke about forgiving 70 times 7? This teaching of Jesus appears in Matthew 18:21-22 and brings surprising depth to the theme of forgiveness in the Christian life. This passage begins with Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, approaching the Master and asking a sincere question. "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Peter's question suggests that he was trying to understand just how far he should go with forgiveness. Perhaps he thought that forgiving up to 7 times was a very generous act, considering it was well above what was expected for the time. However, Jesus surprises everyone by answering, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7, Matthew 18:22. The expression, 70 times 7, holds a deep meaning. To understand this expression, we need to look at the symbolism of numbers in Hebrew culture, where the number 7 represents totality and divine perfection. When Jesus speaks of 70 times 7, he is not proposing a literal calculation of 490 times, but using a figure of speech to express that forgiveness must be unlimited and without restriction. Just as God forgives us continually and without measure, we are called to do the same with our brothers and sisters. Unlimited forgiveness, a reflection of God's grace. In the Bible, forgiveness is often described as an act of grace that mirrors God's own character. In Psalm 103:12, we read that, "As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us." This shows the depth of God's forgiveness, which is not limited or conditioned by the number of times we err, but rather guided by divine love and mercy. Jesus teaches us to reflect this same grace, even when we face the difficulty of repeatedly forgiving. Parable of the Unforgiving Servant, a lesson on forgiveness. Right after answering Peter, Jesus tells a parable to illustrate the true meaning of forgiveness. He narrates the story of a servant who owed an enormous amount to his master and, unable to pay it, begged for mercy. The master, in his compassion, forgave the servant's entire debt. However, this same servant, upon finding another who owed him a much smaller amount, refused to forgive and demanded immediate payment. When the master found out, he became angry and reprimanded the servant for his lack of compassion, handing him over to the tormentors. This parable is a powerful reminder that all of us have been forgiven by God for an incalculable spiritual debt. Just as we were recipients of divine mercy, we are called to demonstrate that same mercy to others without harboring resentment or counting how many times we have forgiven. Forgiveness as a path to inner peace and spiritual growth. Forgiving is not just a divine requirement, but also a path to inner healing and spiritual peace. When we withhold forgiveness, we allow hurt and resentment to grow in our hearts, distancing us from the peace God desires for our lives. Colossians 3:13 instructs us, "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." This instruction reminds us that forgiveness is essential for a life in community and for our spiritual growth. Praying and seeking divine help to forgive. Jesus recognizes that forgiveness is not easy and that we often need to seek divine help to be able to forgive from the heart. In Matthew 6:12, he teaches us to pray, asking God, "Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors." By making this prayer, we acknowledge our need for God's grace to forgive those who hurt us. The Holy Spirit assists us in this process, strengthening our hearts and enabling us to forgive beyond our own strength. A call to a life of forgiveness. Jesus' teaching on 70 times 7 invites us to live a life of continual forgiveness. He does not want us to limit our compassion or keep track of how many times we have forgiven. On the contrary, he calls us to embrace an attitude of forgiveness and unconditional love, reflecting God's infinite mercy toward us. If today you feel that you need God's strength to forgive, say a sincere prayer asking Jesus to teach you to forgive as he forgives us. Comment on this video. Teach me to forgive, and trust that the Lord will give you the strength and grace necessary to live out this forgiveness in its fullness.